Howdy folks, Chief Meteorologist Nicolia here with your tropical update for May 30th of 2019. Brought to you by Pine Belt Gutters. Things are still quiet on this day of hurricane season eve, as it were. That's the best I have. Look, it's May, folks. There's nothing happening. I got to spice these up as best I can. As you look at the peak of hurricane season, eventually we'll get there towards September 10th. We're still in the beginning of the season down here in late May and early June. There is a little uptick that you see on here, a little peak as we head through kind of the middle to end of June, and then a little bit of a valley again, and then we start climbing the ladder, or climbing the mountain as we head toward September 10th. The reason there's that little peak in June actually has to do with where these storms come from. As we look in June for hurricane season, areas of development, generally we're looking into the Gulf of Mexico, just off of the East Coast and then down into the northwestern Caribbean. The reason there's that little bump in June is because generally we don't have big ridges of high pressure sitting on top of the southeast quite yet. The big subtropical ridge hasn't really set in. And we end up with these little systems that kind of glide through parts of the southeast, and the little ends of them kind of break off, where you get these little MCSs, a mesoscale convective system. They just kind of glide into the Gulf of Mexico, into and underneath an upper level ridge, and then they just kind of hang out there and eventually take on more tropical characteristics. And generally that happens in this little bullseye area that you see right in the elbow of Florida, historically speaking. Right now, we don't have that. We've got a big subtropical ridge parked right over the Gulf of Mexico, and it's blocking anything that comes this direction. I will say this, as we head into July, then we start looking a little further out, but we're not there quite yet. We're still hanging out in June. Well, not even yet. We're still in May. We're getting into June, but look at how clear the Gulf of Mexico is. Man, oh man, if you've got a boat and you're heading out to go catch some fish or something out in the Gulf, there's really nothing out there to speak of. I mean, there's really not even kind of the everyday thunderstorms that we kind of see here and there in the Gulf that later in the year even develop. Now, we had the Central American gyre. It's still spinning around down here. You can still see barely a little bit of circulation out here. And then that little piece that cut off of the northeastern quadrant drifted past Cuba, past the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and is now parked over the Greater and Lesser Antilles. As we'll see here in a second, a lot of the models are actually picking up on that over the next couple of days, spinning it up and spinning it back out to sea. The good news is we get the big ridge of high pressure here. Everything goes clockwise around it, so anything that wanted to go north can. It's going to run into that big ridge of high pressure. And then we have a fair amount of shear out here, which is pulling this stuff apart and ripping off the northeastern quadrant of this Central American gyre and keeping anything from developing on this side of Central America. If I were to slide this down, it's not going to let me slide it down. If I were to slide it down and we were to look at stuff off the west coast of Latin America, you could see that there is some semblance of organization out there, but even that's pretty loose. Okay, zooming it back out and looking at the wider picture, you can see this is just getting kind of scraped off and pushed off to the east, a fair amount of shear out into the open Atlantic as well. We don't anticipate anything to happen out there. Here's your big ridge into the Gulf of Mexico all the way through Saturday. You can see a little bit of troughiness off to the north and just off the east coast of the United States. And again, this is an area that we would look for development, but we're not going to see any. Big ridge still parked in place. I will say this, over the next couple of days, a lot of the models have shifted. Originally, they had it really blowing up across parts of South Texas. Now they've got it kind of parked out into the Gulf of Mexico, maybe a little bit over Louisiana, a little bit closer to South Mississippi, which is why I tend to think we're actually going to be a degree or two warmer as we head through early to the middle part of next week before the ridge takes over a little bit into the central United States. Here we are through Friday, Saturday. We're getting in toward the middle of June here. Nothing. We've got two little bullseyes down here, but other than that, a whole lot of nothing. All right, so let's go over to the 700 millibar moisture 850 vorticity map. One of my favorite maps in the entire world. It showed the grayed out areas. That's where we got dry air, and the mid-levels here, out into the open Atlantic. You can kind of see all the way out here. Anywhere that we've got this grayed out area, it is dry in the mid-levels. You're not going to see anything developing up there because if it's dry, obviously, you don't have thunderstorms. Thunderstorms wet, that's water. All right, great. We cleared out like half of the area out here. So then you start looking at these bluish, greenish, yellowish, and orangish areas. That's areas of low-level vorticity, low-level spin in the atmosphere. And that spin that you would see is due to a localized area of lower pressure. And then when we look out into the tropics, that's always what we're looking for, areas of low pressure. Well, this one's parked over the land, so we don't have to worry about that one as much. But that is your Central American gyre out here, just kind of floating around. You can see a little piece of it kind of breaks off and gets out into the Bay of Campeche. But outside of that, this is through Tuesday, June 4th. We are dry into the Gulf of Mexico, dry out through the Bahamas. This little piece right there is that little chunk that I was talking about a couple of minutes ago that passed over the Dominican Republic and Haiti and out toward Puerto Rico. It kind of lifts back off to the north and gets sucked into the main flow up there and gets ripped apart and pulled underneath a lot of the dry air, and doesn't really bother anybody. And again, this is through the first week in June, when we still have dry air over the Gulf of Mexico. So again, there's your tropical update for May 30th of 2019, brought to you by the good folks at Pine Belt Gutters. I got nothing but good news to relay, which is on hurricane season eve. We've got nothing brewing out in the tropics, and it doesn't look like anything's going to get brewing as we head through the next week.